Hi, my name is Joanna, and today I'm doing the Converse sneakers tag. I was tagged by Dark Portons. If you're not subscribed to Dark Portons, please do so. He and his wife are relaunching their channel right now. They both did this tag, and I'll leave links to both of those tags in my description box. This is an original tag that was created by Vallestad, and there's only one question, and that is, what book or books shaped you as a teenager and as a result influence how you see all other literature today? This is not asking for the best book you read, but rather what you read during that time period. Christine, who also has a fantastic booktube channel, which I highly recommend subscribing to, explained that this tag was inspired by what scientists call neuronostalgia. This is a phenomenon in which we have wonderful, happy, nostalgic feelings that come up when we hear songs from our past that we were attracted to when we were young, even if we objectively don't think they are very good anymore. She was speculating that the same thing must apply to what we read when we were younger. What's interesting about my story is that I share some things in common with what Christine described in her video. I went to a Catholic elementary school, and like many children, I had very dualistic concepts of right, wrong, good, bad, smart people, not smart people, and sadly, I saw myself as not smart. And unfortunately, this was confirmed not by just one teacher, but by a few teachers in that school. In fact, my 5th grade teacher actually told my father that she predicted I would be a high school dropout by the age of 14. I didn't learn about that conversation until much later in life. My parents didn't tell me. They just pulled me out of that Catholic school and they put me into a public school, which was its own form of culture shock. It was culture shock for me to go from a small Catholic school setting, class of 10, to a large public school setting, class of 200. But we'll get into that in a little bit. Even though I had a very negative self-concept, I still always found books really neat. And I remember in 3rd grade, the book that I gravitated towards was Helen Keller's The Story of My Life. There was something about Helen Keller's story and the way that she didn't allow her disabilities to define her or limit her self-concept, which really spoke to me. And I think that that was a theme that became important throughout the rest of my life. I won't go into too much detail, but I can definitely see that playing a role. The next book I was drawn to was one that my cousin had checked out called Summer of Fear by Lois Duncan. It was in our library there at the Catholic elementary school, and I remember just being very drawn to the cover. I have to admit that the horror thriller theme was appealing to me as a Catholic schoolgirl, just the rebellious part of my nature. So I checked that book out, and shortly after reading it, I had to read everything by Lois Duncan. It was also neat to note that Lois Duncan lived in New Mexico, where I was living, so it was neat to read from an author that was fairly local to me. After reading all the Lois Duncan books I could find, I started reading R.L. Stine's Fear Street books. The YA selection was very limited at the time. Those books helped me get through that really tough transition of going from the Catholic elementary school to the public middle school. I remember living for the weekends so I could read those books. I went through a few years in which I didn't read for fun at all, and the next book I remember being meaningful to me was actually Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. I had to read that for a summer school English class with this amazing English teacher named Mr. Raffiti. I wish I could find him. He was kind of young, and he was just so nice to me. He seemed to believe in me, even though I absolutely didn't believe in myself at all. And I just remember he and I had such great discussions about that book. I think he liked me because I was willing to go in depth and discuss things about the books that we read, whereas the rest of the class seemed kind of checked out. We read a few books in that class, but that was the book that was just very emotionally impactful for me. I just remember finding it more sad than anything, and that surprised me. I figured that Frankenstein would be a scary book, so I wasn't expecting that, and I think it really stuck with me for years and years. That said, I didn't read Frankenstein because I wanted to. I read it because I had to for that class. The next book I read because I wanted to was one that I found in a bookstore, and the cover honestly appealed to me. And it was called Summer of Love. I found this in the adult sci-fi section at a bookstore, And I remember I was about the same age as the main protagonist in this book. It's actually a historical sci-fi book. It takes place in the 60s, in 1967, Summer of Love in San Francisco. And the way that Mason brought that to life, the way she described it, it really felt to me like as though I was there. What I love about really good historical fiction or books like this is when the author not only makes this setting seem exciting and appealing in a way, but also brings out the darker tones and the problematic parts of that era. She didn't glorify the 60s or the hippie movement or the Summer of Love, but she brought so many different colors to it. So you saw the good, the bad, the ugly, and you saw it through this main protagonist perspective, and it's very much like a chosen one kind of trope and a coming of age story, but not in a traditional way. There is a sci-fi element here. There is somebody who comes from the future back to this time period to find this girl. I won't say anything more about it. I think I'm going to discuss this in another video sometime. But it was very meaningful to me. I did reread it years later and I still loved it. I thought the character work was good. There's actually good representation in this book, believe it or not. Plus, unless you consider Frankenstein sci-fi, which it kind of is, this might have been my first sci-fi or my first modern sci-fi. And to this day, one of my favorite subgenres is historical fiction, especially sci-fi historical fiction with the time travel element. This book might have been the first. The next book that was very meaningful to me on my journey was The Hobbit. And the way this came to me was through a group of friends. My very, very best friend lived just down the street from me, and her two older brothers were longtime D&D players. She introduced me to this group of friends outside of the high school we were at, who were a bunch of LARPers, RPGers, gamers, and we were the youngest in that crowd, but it was so fun to be with this ragtag group of friends who liked to LARP on the weekends, go to cafes, talk all types of things that went way over my head because they were so much smarter than me. These were people that like read and reread Dune several times, and they understood science really well. Whereas I was reading R.L. Stine as a child. One of them was reading Stephen King books at the age of 8 and 9. So I felt like these people were way above my level. They talked way over my head. And I think what happened because as a result of that was that I equated fantasy with intelligence. That was the association I made through that group of friends. I also equated fantasy with other things that I loved. And the first real fantasy book I read was The Hobbit. My best friend lent me The Hobbit, and as soon as I started reading that book, I felt like I was discovering a part of my soul or something that I just didn't even know was missing, but it definitely did evoke that sense of wonder and curiosity. And remember, at the time, I had a very low self-concept. I did not think of myself as a smart person, but I wanted to be smart. And being with this group of friends made that even more inspirational for me. And reading The Hobbit and reading J.R.R. Tolkien made me feel like there was a pathway for me. So it gave me a sense of aspiration. And although I mentioned in a previous video, I never finished The Lord of the Rings. That's my plan for this year, is to actually complete that series. I did read The Hobbit, I did read The Fellowship of the Ring, The Two Towers, I started Return of the King, and then life got a little chaotic, but it was a very important, influential series for me for sure. I did read some other fantasy books. I think the first series actually completed was the Elric Saga by Michael Moorcock, but not many that I could say were formative for me. So there you have it, the mystery suspense thriller books that I read as a child, I think got me in the habit of reading regularly and made me realize I could love books and just love the escapism factor of books. But the books that I read in high school, even though fantasy is more associated with escapism, those books were the ones that got me fascinated by my world and what I could do as a person and aspire towards greater heights. So that sounds very dramatic, but it's true. And this is why we love to read, right? I mean, we are here because reading impacted us on a very significant level at some point. Thank you so much, Dark Portents, for tagging me. And thank you, Christine, for creating this tag. I'm going to go ahead and tag 3 people. The first one is Ridima. I love Ridima's channel. I love her analysis videos. She's so thoughtful and insightful. I would love to hear her do this tag. The next person I'm going to tag is somebody that I feel like deserves way more subscribers than he has. Books by Klaus. He has a channel that's divided into German and English videos, so you could also practice your German if you know little. He's so funny and interesting, and he always has such strong opinions about what he reads and why he feels the way he feels. The next person I'm going to tag is a Malaz tuber who's fairly new to BookTube. His name is The Blue Jay, and he has fantastic content on Malazan. If that is a series you're reading, please check him out. He's very passionate. He speaks very well. He and I finished House of Chains around the same time, but he's already way ahead of me with Midnight Tides. Please support all three of these channels if you get a chance. And if you want to do this tag, Christine did make this an open invitation, so please feel free to do it. Please let me know in the comments what you think about anything I shared, or feel free to share with me what books shaped you as a reader when you were younger. Thank you so much for watching, and have a great rest of your day. Bye-bye.